Hi, everybody. This is Saad. I'm a bit late to this party, but I wanted to briefly weigh in on the Laurence Fox, Eva Evans debacle that took place at Great Britain News. So let me just summarize at least what I know of the story and then maybe offer some comments and thoughts. Eva Evans is someone whom I didn't know until this story broke. She's apparently a staunch feminist who's often made comments that are detrimental to or derogatory toward men in general. And she had appeared last Monday, I think, on a show where they were discussing suicide. And she seemed to be quite dismissive of the idea that given that men there are different estimates, but the global male to female suicide ratio is 3 to 1 for men, meaning men on average commit about 3 times uh, or succumb to suicide 3 times more than women. Now, to give you a sense of how powerful that effect is, when you're talking in science about an odds ratio, if you say that giving a placebo pill versus an actual pill resulted in a 1.2 odds ratio. Like the effect is that means 1 to 1.2, meaning it's 20% more effective. So 1 to 1.2, this is 1 to 3. So it's a massive effect that you seldom see. And so men are committing suicide at an average rate of 3 times higher than women globally. Now, I published a paper back. Let me just read it for you. I published a paper in a medical journal. The journal is called Medical Hypotheses, 2007, volume 68, page 692 to 696. I will put the link to the paper of my paper. It was a paper looking at some evolutionarily relevant metrics that might explain why around the world the male to female suicide ratio might be different. In some countries it might be 6 to 1, in some countries it might be 2.3 to 1. And I was arguing that an evolutionary relevant metric that relates to social status is going to be uniquely important to men from an evolutionary perspective. And so what I did is I took data from the World Health Organization to look at suicide data around the world, and then I also had World Bank data regarding some economic metric, and then I correlated these to show that as economic conditions worsen, the male to female ratio worsens. Okay, so it was applying an evolutionary lens to understand some of these sex differences in this case as applied to suicide. The title of the paper is Suicide Triggers as Sex-Specific Threats in Domains of Evolutionary Import, Negative Correlation Between Global Male-to-Female Suicide Ratios and Average Per Capita Gross National Income. And as I said, I will put a link to this paper if anybody wants to go see it. Why am I mentioning all this? Because it is certainly a deeply problematic global reality to know that men commit suicide at a rate of 3 times more than women. Now, it is true that women attempt suicide more often, but men are more successful in completing that objective. And so, in the political discussion that was taking place on that show, where Eva Evans was dismissing, so someone was saying, well, there seems to be some unique challenges that we need to look at in terms of why men are much more prone to commit suicide. And in the same way that we tackle certain realities that are uniquely challenging to women, it might make sense, for example, to come up with, I can't remember the terms they use, like a ministry of men or something. And she was very, very dismissive in a truly callous and inhumane way, right? I mean, why should we care only about men? This is about mental health issue and so on. Because again, I don't know her well, but if I can generally explain this victimology mentality, whenever you usurp the full victimology from a quote marginalized group, then members of that marginalized group get very angry. So in this case, she apparently has built a career on, women being the victims. And therefore, now that you come along and say, but here's a context where it is overwhelmingly men who are suffering, well, then that doesn't fit the narrative, and therefore you scoff at it, you mock it. Well, we don't need any special attention to men. So now here comes Laurence Fox, by the way, who's been on my show, I think twice. I've been on his show. And he's chatting with Dan Woothen, who's another person who works at Great Britain News. I think I've been on his show maybe once or twice. And actually, just earlier that last Saturday, I had been on Mark Dolan's show for the first time, who also is a host at Great Britain News. And Laurence Fox was basically saying some really punchy things about Eva Evans, including he used, some language and some ideas that I must say are probably ones that he shouldn't have used. He said he was basically so repulsed by her, so disgusted by her. He said, well, which incel would ever want to, I think he used the British term, shag her. Now, it could well be that he's just exhibiting his sort of moral repugnance at how she had reacted. I still think that it was ill-advised. I don't think that the discourse should have this kind of language, whether you find her desirable enough or not to be intimate with her has nothing to do with the fact that she was callous in her position. So you could make that point without using... And by the way, it's not as though I'm this little Victorian prude who can't handle locker room talk, but, you are in a public forum. You are someone who has a certain privileged position in society. I'm speaking now about Laurence, and it would have been maybe better if he had not used that example. But that said, Laurence went on the attack. He is a honey badger. He is someone who doesn't suffer fools gladly. And he posted some tweets from her, some screenshots of tweets. So here's one from her from January 19th, 2022. This is from Eva Evans, who also, I guess, goes by the name Eva Santina. I will continue to wear my mask on the tube to protect myself from the most powerful virus of them all, men. So she's able to go on a public forum and say that the greatest virus known to, and I believe me, I understand all about hyperbolic humor. I recently got into trouble for making a hyperbolic joke about the auditory unattractiveness of the French-Canadian accent. But in this case, this is true to form in terms of how she's very feminist and, she's always fighting against men and the patriarchy and so on. So I will continue to wear my mask on the tube to protect myself from the most powerful virus of them all, men. Meaning she'll hide maybe herself because men are such pigs. All men perhaps are rapists. All men are predators. All men are viruses. So that's one. So she can say that, but he can't go and hyperbolically. And again, I would not have advised him to use such language and such prose, but he did, and he was angry. Okay, let's go on. Then, speaking about the point about the shagging, he meaning Laurence, finds a whole bunch of places where she used the shag term. So I live by a church that has been ringing bells since 9 a.m. Please, how do I make it stop? He's not going to shag you. And then she answers someone else, some guy, I'm not going to shag you, pal. Laurence isn't going to shag you, mate. I'm not going to shag you, mate. Again, she's answering someone else. So she can go on the record in a public forum and say to a wide assortment of men, I'm not going to shag you. You're unworthy of being shagged. But when Laurence does it, he loses his job. Now, Dan Woothen, with whom he was having the conversation, because he, I guess, didn't walk away in abject indignation, because he smiled and so on, then he was I don't know if he was suspended or fired by proxy. He didn't exhibit the right level of repulsion at what Laurence was saying, so he was then let go or suspended. And then Calvin Robinson, whom I also know, who's an absolutely lovely guy, who's been on my show, refused to go on Dan Wootton's show if Dan Wootton wasn't going to be the host or something to that effect, and he was suspended. So basically, Great Britain News is suspending anyone in sight. Oh, the grade 3 grammar teacher of one of these three people, put her in prison by proxy, right? It's a form of orgiastic hysteria. So what are the key lessons here? Number one, in a fair society, people are punished in the exact same way for if they break the law or break a norm. There is no preference given to people who are tall or short, or atheists or believers, or men or women, right? That's why Lady Justice in general is blind, but that's why our moral code, our etiquette code, has to also be blind. It's not if you're a woman, you can get away with calling men viruses, the worst of viruses, and you can use exactly the thing that got Laurence Fox into trouble, which is, I'm not going to shag you, I'm not going to shag you. But the minute that he uses it, then he becomes persona non grata. He's a disgusting, vile creature that must be excised from the public square. Now, that also says something else. It says that if, I'm speaking now to the feminist Eva Evans, if men and women are equal, of course they should be equal under the law, but if they're equal in their abilities to navigate, for example, through the public arena, then women should not need extra protection when someone uses this, I consider to be inappropriate and vulgar discourse, which is, I'm not going to shag you. If it's inappropriate for him to use it on you, which I think is inappropriate, then it's certainly inappropriate for this lady to be using it on men. It can't be that she gets a pass, but he doesn't. Because then that is no different from Sharia law. Islamic law, as I explained in The Parasitic Mind, precisely recognizes that a crime, the punishment for a crime, depends on the identity, the religion of the perpetrator and the victim. Muslim man kills a Jewish woman is not the same penalty as a Hindi woman killing a Muslim man, or whatever permutation you want. So that's the problem with the progressive calculus when it creates these hierarchies of victimology and marginalized groups. You're exactly abiding to the tenets of Sharia law. What makes the West great, again, are these deontological principles that are inviolable. We're all equal in terms of what is expected of us, both in terms of proper discourse, proper etiquette, following the law. There is no difference if you're a man or a woman. It's not if you're a woman and you speak in a vulgar manner about men, you get away with it. But if it's the other way around, you don't get away with it, right? And basically that argues in a very, perhaps not so subtle way, that women are delicate flowers that can't handle then that discourse. When a woman gives it to a man, he's supposed to brush it off and move on, because a strong woman is going to fight for her position. When a guy uses the exact same language on a woman, then suddenly he becomes Himmler. This is not good. So, to summarize, in my view, it was inappropriate for Laurence to use that kind of prose. I think it debases the discussion for absolutely no reason. He could have made his position known without talking about, she's unattractive to be shagged and so on. I don't think that he should be able to receive a reprimand from GB News, perhaps get on and say, hey, I apologize, that was crude and vulgar and in poor taste of me, and I apologize unreservedly for what I said, and then we hug it out and we move on. There needs to be a way for there to be a path for someone who makes a mistake to redeem themselves. And again, what happens with the ultra purist progressive woke mob, the cancel culture, is that there is no way to seek penance, right? You're out, you're dead, you're executed, so to speak. Not executed literally, but your career is executed. You need to be removed from society. And now she goes on a victim tour. She's receiving death threats and violence, and she's a victim, and I'm more victim and victim. If I showed her the number of death threats that I receive for all sorts of reasons, I'm willing to bet that I would score much higher than her in terms of actual victimology. So there you have it. Let's step back, people. Let's be fair. Let's be reasonable. Let's be proper in our public discourse. But if Laurence Fox is going to be fired, then by that exact same calculus, there is no reason why this lady should not have been fired long ago. In my view, neither should be fired. Neither should engage in this kind of discourse. And we should be adult enough and anti-fragile enough to handle when people use language that is otherwise inappropriate and vulgar. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care. Ciao.